You know, for the longest amount of time, I had been calling Captain America vs. Iron Man Civil War overrated, and of course, plenty of people have questioned why I came to that conclusion. To put it quite lightly, overrated does not mean bad. It just means that you're raising something to a standard or quality that realistically speaking, it does not deserve. And I feel like when you look at the MCU Civil War, especially when you compare it to the comics, it misses the mark for a good chunk of the time. And trust me, I'm not gonna make this whole video comparing the comics to the movie because that would be pretty lame and annoying. At the end of the day, they are two separate entities. Even though one is drawing influence from the other, they're completely different. But it's still very hard to ignore some of the things that the comic did better than the film, and trust me, we're gonna get to that later in this video. Before I get into my negatives though about the film, let me talk about the positives because there are some things I really did enjoy in this movie. Obviously, the acting performances were really good, primarily from Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr., and Sebastian Stan. But I think my favorite part of the film, even though he was only there for a little bit, was obviously Spider-Man's cameo. Spider-Man was really a breath of fresh air for a film that was kind of bland for a little bit before they got to his part. I mean, of course you had your typical action scenes before then, but nothing really stood out in my opinion different from a lot of other MCU movies, especially coming off of what we saw in Winter Soldier. Spider-Man brought a whole new life to that film, and all the scenes with him was really good, really energetic, nice charisma, great acting performance from Tom Holland in his debut appearance as Spider-Man. And I'll be remiss if I didn't talk about the little chemistry and some of the tidbits from the Avengers in this film, because sometimes just the little things add up. Some of the interactions between Winter Soldier and Falcon I thought highlighted their chemistry, which is why when they announced the Falcon and Winter Soldier show, I was pretty hyped to see it, but unfortunately obviously it let me down in numerous ways. Another thing about this movie that I enjoyed so much was the story of Black Panther. I mean, I love Spider-Man for his quick cameo, but I have to say Black Panther, he's probably the best character throughout the entire movie in my personal opinion. His motives make so much sense. I mean, the guy thought Bucky killed his father and then immediately told Black Widow, okay, I'm going to kill this guy. He had a pretty good introduction in his suit with the fight against Bucky and Captain America, but I have to say even up until the conclusion, everything is great about T'Challa's performance and character story. He was so focused on vengeance, just like a lot of the other Avengers, especially at the end with Iron Man versus Captain America and Bucky, that he let the real villain slip right away, and once he found that villain, he understood that vengeance just wasn't the answer to fix his problems. I actually enjoyed Black Panther in the Civil War film than I did in his own first film, and that's not to knock the Black Panther movie. I like that movie, but I really did enjoy him in this film, and now that I think about it, I might have enjoyed him more than Spider-Man. It's a toss-up, I'm not gonna lie. There are other solid scenes I like in this film, but enough of the good stuff. Let's talk about why you guys came here, why I think this movie is overrated. Let's start off with the first point of this movie, and let's talk about the stakes. The stakes of this movie are such a joke. I mean, we're literally told that the superheroes are not allowed to work without the consent of the government or they will be prosecuted. But yet we still see throughout this movie and other movies right after, like in Spider-Man Homecoming, where numerous superheroes said, fuck it, I'm still gonna go against the Accords anyway. That makes no sense at all, bruh. You got Spider-Man teaming up with Iron Man in order to instill the peace accords, but then Spider-Man goes to his own city with Iron Man, I should add, and is encouraged by Tony to go against those same accords that they spent an entire movie fighting over. And by the end of the movie, when all of our superheroes, or at least we thought all of our superheroes outside of Captain America that were on his side, are locked up, Cap then shows up at the end to free all of them. What kind of stakes are those? I mean, I understand that some of that factors into the Infinity War movie, but as far as this particular movie as a standalone, it makes those Accords look weak and foolish. I mean, what's the point of going through all of this shit with the Accords if you're just going to undo all the things that the Accords put in place within the first film? It really just didn't make any sense, and it seemed like they just put that in place now in hindsight in order to justify Thanos winning in Infinity War. But that doesn't make any sense to me because Civil War is supposed to be one of the biggest movies that they have ever done. Even at that time, go look at how people were talking about that movie. Why sacrifice your core plot in order just to build something up in the future? I mean, I understand planting seeds here and there, but that just never made any sense to me. And speaking of things that don't make sense, that brings me to another point that I hate about this movie. Why is the government blaming the Avengers for everything? How can they sit there and say, why did you cause so much chaos when Loki came to attack us? It'd be one thing if Thor was there and they brought that up, because at the end of the day, Loki came following Thor's arrival, but Thor wasn't there. Hell, the Hulk wasn't even there. They also blamed them for what happened in the Winter Soldier movie. That is so ridiculous, bro. Because guess what? For starters, the Avengers all weren't even there for that in totality. It was just Captain America and his squad. And secondly, that was a SHIELD problem. That was not an Avengers issue. That was on the government, not the Avengers. They're the ones who allowed Hydra to infiltrate all of the aspects of their politics, and Captain America and his posse had to clean all that shit the fuck up. How can you blame them for that? Now, I will admit, Ultron, that was on the Avengers, cause Tony Stark, you foolish ass nigga. But blaming them for events that they didn't even cause, especially one that was caused by your negligence, is very dumb to me. And I can understand the government trying to pawn that shit off on the Avengers, because at the end of the day, the government has their own agendas. But why would Iron Man agree with that bullshit? And I know what people are gonna say. What about that black mom who approached Tony in the elevator and said, "Hey, you killed my son in Age of Ultron"? I'm not gonna lie to you, if I was Iron Man, I would just cut the lady a check and call it a day. Iron Man used to make weapons that killed people overseas. If we're looking at this logically here, you can't tell me that he hasn't understood that kids, women, children have died indirectly due to his and the other Avengers' problems. Why is this kid any different than the others? Because he saw a picture of him? I'm sorry, that is not enough for me to then understand why Iron Man's gonna team up with the government. The same government that tried to take his own suit away. That is just so stupid to me. Oh yeah, by the way, remember when Captain America got with Sharon, Peggy's niece? That is still to this day one of the weirdest parts of the MCU. And honestly, it's crazy that nobody really talks about that. I mean, I don't think Captain America is some pedophile or anything like that, but at the end of the day, you made out, and I assume probably had sex with, the niece of your ex-girlfriend from the World War II era. And it's only crazier that we literally saw this guy in love with Peggy basically on her deathbed, or a little bit closer to it when she had Alzheimer's in the Captain America Winter Soldier movie, but yet he had no problem flirting with Sharon Carter in that movie, and he had no problem making out with her in this movie. It's a weird dynamic, man. Like it or not, it's super weird. But I could talk about all of the nitpicks here and there about the story that I want. The biggest issue I do have with the movie has nothing to do with any of that. My biggest issue with the movie comes down to two words: wrong timing. This movie never should have happened, at least at the time that it did. Could you imagine if they saved a film like that for later on in the MCU? Especially right now after Infinity War and Endgame, where the MCU is kinda in flux of what they're gonna do next. A Civil War movie would have been perfect later on to build towards. Because like the comics, the Civil War story was built over time when they had a lot of characters in the story and a lot of things happening at the time. I mean, the comic was literally set in motion by kids dying. I believe it was 600 people, including school children, dying in a fight between the New Warriors and a group of other villains. Hell, even some of the heroes that were fighting had died. I believe only one of the New Warriors survived. Not only does the fight and death of 600 people, including kids, not even come close to what started off the movie Civil War, but you could also look at other situations that happened in the world at the time in the comics that led to that tipping point, such as Scarlet Witch and the Mutants. Could you imagine if now they tried to make a Civil War movie following what happened in WandaVision or Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness? It would have actually made perfect sense, especially for regular civilians to be on board with superheroes having to be regulated by the government. But no, we had to blow it off on a film that didn't even have two of our OG 6 Avengers. I mean, just look at what they were complaining about, things that Thor and the Hulk contributed to more. As far as the Avengers first film, if you want to blame anybody on that Avengers team, you could blame Thor, but he wasn't there. And if you want to just talk about raw destruction caused by any of the Avengers, the Hulk is the first person you should single out, but guess what? He wasn't there. It almost felt like they were blaming the other guys for still being on the team. At the end of the day, this movie could have been timed a whole lot better after certain events already took place in the MCU. It just seemed like they wanted a big cash grab in an Avengers movie that wasn't technically basically an Avengers movie. And as much as many others enjoy the film, it could have been a whole lot better and had issues that could have been resolved with just a few tweaks in the writing. When this movie came out, I was initially very excited to not only watch it, but even afterwards my reaction was, damn, this was one of the best comic book movies I've ever seen. But now in hindsight, in retrospect, I cannot lie, this movie is extremely overrated and I contributed towards it being overrated in the mass public. I mean, I see people going online saying that it's a top 5 Marvel movie, and that is just so disrespectful. Because when you make it a top 5 Marvel movie, not only are you including movies in the X-Men universe like Logan, but let's just throw that aside for a second. Let's say most people are saying it's a top 5 MCU movie. That film isn't even the best movie in its own series, because I'm taking Winter Soldier over it. It isn't even better than any of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, so I'm taking all 3 of those movies over it. And then you can easily put Avengers Infinity War over that film. You got Thor Ragnarok over that film. You got all of the Spider-Man movies over that film. I mean, I can keep going here. That movie is not sniffing any top 5 list of any kind. But yet I consistently see people put it in those conversations, which leads me to say Captain America vs. Iron Man Civil War is one of the most overrated comic book movies ever.